Hey, what's going on, guys? My name's Griffin, and I'm a filmmaker based out of Orange County, California. And today we're going to be talking about the Canon R5 versus the 1DX Mark III. So I've owned the 1DX Mark III for about 5 months now, and this serves as my primary stills camera. And it's also a great option for hybrid jobs where I need to shoot both photos and videos. And it also serves as a B or a C camera to my C500 Mark II sometimes. But when I heard about the Canon R5 coming out, I was like, wow. So here we have this smaller camera, it's lighter, it's cheaper, and it pretty much has better specs all the way around. So I kind of wanted to find out for myself, is this a camera that could actually replace my 1DX Mark III? So for about the last week or so, I've been putting both these cameras through a bunch of different tests, and the three main things I wanted to focus on were image quality, ergonomics, and real-world use. Okay, so jumping right into image quality, first section I want to talk about is RAW. The R5 shoots 8K up to 30p, and the 1DX Mark III shoots 5.5K RAW up to 60p. So if you're looking to get any high frame rates right off the bat, the 1DX Mark III is going to be the one for you if you're looking to shoot in RAW. I would say the image quality is really comparable here. It looks super similar to my eyes. I'll show you what it looks like when I interpret the footage as C-Log2, which is going to be the widest dynamic range. And you can see both cameras look super flat. This is going to really match up well with like a cinema camera if you're using it on a bigger production. One thing I did notice is the R5 does come in a little bit more contrasty, and I'm not really sure if that has to do with the type of ND filters that I was using. On the 1DX Mark III, I was using a 4-stop Polar Pro ND filter, and it's a pretty high quality ND filter. And on the R5, I was using the EF to RF adapter with the built-in ND. I wanted to expose where the highlights were just clipping a tiny bit on Delaney's hair. And you can see I'll pull both exposures back 3 stops. It pretty much looks the same to me. I wouldn't say one has the edge in dynamic range. And I would say there's less of a difference in sharpness here between the 1DX Mark III and the R5. So the second category I want to take a look at was the 4K 10-bit 422. This is using H.265 compression. I've talked about this a lot. Super difficult on the computers to edit, so you'll probably have to use proxies for both of these unless you have a pretty fast computer. Image quality wise, I think it's pretty much a draw on this one too. I wouldn't say one camera is doing better than the other. They both look sharp, they both look high quality. You can kind of push and pull them a little bit in the grade without them breaking right apart. I would say, honestly, the main difference I notice here is there's a little bit more contrast coming out of the R5. So next test here is the 4K 60 out of both cameras. The R5 shoots 4K 60 with full autofocus, whereas on the 1DX Mark III, when you shoot 4K 60 in full frame, you don't have autofocus. You can drop it down to a 1.3 crop mode and you can get your autofocus back. So first test here is in the full frame mode. So here's the R5. I think it looks super great. I mean, really solid. And now jumping over to the 1DX Mark III. Again, I think it looks really solid as well. I'm just having to manually focus here though, so it's not going to be perfectly in focus for the whole shot. And then I ran the same test with the 1DX Mark III in the 1.3 crop mode. I don't find this being a huge unbearable crop. I don't really mind it too much. Of course, I would prefer full frame with autofocus, but I would definitely take the 1.3 crop over a mode that overheats. So I am going to talk a little bit more about the overheating that I experienced on some real world jobs, but I'll kind of save that for later in this review. Okay, jumping over to the 120 frames per second. Again, the R5 bests the 1DX Mark III here. It shoots in 4K 120, whereas the 1DX Mark III only shoots in 1080 when it's shooting in 120 frames per second. Both of these can shoot in 10-bit 422 though, so it does look really solid. There's not a giant difference to my eyes. Obviously, if you punch in here, you can see the R5 is quite a bit sharper than the 1DX Mark III, but I think they both look super solid. I would say this is totally usable, and I have no real problems taking the 1080 image from the 1DX Mark III and upscaling that to 4K and using that in a 4K deliverable. But if I had to pick a winner as far as image quality goes, it would be the R5, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the overheating on this mode later as well. So last category I tested as far as image quality was high ISO. I would say the 1DX Mark III is the clear winner on this category. I would say it's about 1 to 1.5 stops cleaner. So you can see I just matched up the ISOs. I'll put those on the screen right here. So unfortunately on this test, I accidentally shot them at different white balances. So you can kind of just ignore that part of the test. But I would say the 1DX Mark III, it doesn't have that kind of dancing grain in the shadows. It just looks a little bit cleaner. And on top of that, it actually goes to quite a bit higher ISOs as well. It'll actually go up to 102,400 on the ISO, whereas the R5 maxes out at 51,200. you kind of get into pretty unusable territory on both cameras there. But what I would say is if you're someone who's like out on safari or you're shooting some sort of like documentary situation, and it's kind of like you can either get the shot or you can't get the shot and you don't care so much about image quality, it is nice that the 1DX Mark III has those extra high ISO modes. So that can help you probably achieve a shot that might not be possible on the R5. Okay, so second category is ergonomics. This is just kind of like my overall thoughts and opinions on how the cameras feel. I'm gonna just kind of rapid fire through a list right here of just some general notes that I had. You guys can kind of take them for what they're worth. So in terms of size and weight, you can see the 1DX Mark III is quite a bit bigger than the R5. Personally, I prefer the bigger body because it's gonna help stabilize your shots a little bit. Even though the R5 has IBIS and the 1DX Mark III doesn't have like proper IBIS, it only has the electronic IBIS, I still find that I'm able to sort of like brace the camera and get a little bit more stable shots. And it definitely has a much larger grip as well. You can see it fits my hand super comfortably there. Whereas on the R5, it just kind of like, I always find that my pinky is sort of like hanging off there. So I would say the build quality on the 1DX Mark III is quite a bit better. It just feels super rock solid. And I mean, I've even dropped my 1DX Mark II and just like didn't have any problems whatsoever. The weather sealing is also quite a bit better on the 1DX Mark III than the R5. One thing I do like a lot about the R5 though, the flip screen though. This is really nice if you're like getting low angle shots. I've said it before in some other reviews, I'm a tall guy. Having that flip screen, it allows you to get the low angle or high angle shots quite a bit easier. It's not like just for vloggers or whatever. Last thing I would say about ergonomics is I really like the way you can control the AF points on the 1DX Mark III. It's got this touchpad where you can basically just move it around almost like you would like a trackpad on a computer. So this is really nice and it's super fast from changing your autofocus points from like the left side to the right side. And it also is really nice too if you have it hooked up to an external monitor, and that mode's not available on the R5. Okay, so last section is real world use of the cameras. This is the section that I would say is the absolute most important. You can like test dynamic range all you want in your bedroom or whatever, or outside, and that's all well and good. But once you use the cameras in the real world, it's usually quite a bit different. That's one thing that I really try to focus on a lot with my reviews. So the three main use cases that I put this camera through were portraits with a little bit of video. The second one was as a B camera for my C500 Mark II. And then the third one was on a hybrid job where I was shooting mostly photos and shooting some 120 frames per second video for some boxing. So I'll just say it, the R5 makes a really great portrait camera. If you're someone who's a photographer, you'll probably love the R5. I really like using the EVF. I do prefer that over the optical viewfinder. It's really nice to be able to see your exposure changes right in the viewfinder. And it's also really nice for video as well. So I went out with Delaney, and I also want to just give a quick shout out to Delaney. I'm actually posting this video on her birthday, so I'll put her Instagram in the bio, but maybe you guys can go drop her a comment and tell her happy birthday. She's always the one helping us out for this test, so big shout out to her. But I was really happy with what we were able to capture here. We did a lot of photos, and we also switched over and caught a little bit of video. And one thing that I found that was really nice was the built-in ND adapter. This is really nice because you can go from basically 1.5 stops at ND all the way up to 9 stops. So you can basically go from shooting totally wide open on your lenses for photos, and then you can click it over to video. Your shutter speed is going to slow down, but then you can just drop in the variable ND and you can change your exposure right up. It's really nice if you're kind of like jumping back and forth. One small thing I did like better about the 1DX Mark III is I like the sound of the shutter so much more. I'll take a few photos with both cameras just so you can get like a sound for each shutter. Here's the R5, and here's the 1DX Mark III. So the second use case I used these cameras for was as a B camera to my C500 Mark II. I just kind of set up a little mock interview with Delaney in our living room here. And here's the R5, and here's the 1DX Mark III. I mean, I would say both of these cameras look almost the same, so I wouldn't say there's a winner here. And then now here's the C500 Mark II, which is quite a bit different. So I shot in C-Log 2 on the C500 Mark II, and on the R5 and the 1DX Mark III, I shot in C-Log 1 because that's the only one that's available in the compressed codec. And I didn't want to shoot all the way in RAW because the file sizes are just like insane. You know, I wouldn't say there's like a clear winner here. I would say both of these cameras don't match up as well as the C200. If I shot with the C200 as the B cam, it'd be a match straight away. Whereas with the R5 and the 1DX Mark III, they're both really good, and with like a little bit of tweaking, you can get them to match pretty well. Okay, so for this third real world use case, I took the camera actually out on a paid job with me. So this job was about 90% photos. We're just shooting some social media photos, And then we also shot some video. We wanted to shoot some stuff that was in 120 frames per second because it's going to be going into a bigger edit. I wanted to use the R5, found it really great, and one thing I really liked about it was the flip screen again. It was nice to capture the video from a little bit of low angles. Also, it was a bright sunny day, so having that electronic viewfinder available was really nice because I was able to see the exposure. So towards the end of the job, my two buddies, Aaron and Tommy, decided that they wanted to do a little bit of light sparring. So I was like, hey, that's pretty sweet. I'm gonna film this whole thing in slow motion. Well, this is where things took a bad turn for me. Right as the action started picking up, the camera actually overheated on me. I shot for less than an hour and it was around 1,000 photos, and it was actually less than 6 minutes of 120 frames per second video. It wasn't like a crazy hot day or anything like that. It's about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So fortunately I had the 1DX Mark III with me, so I swapped over super quick and just started shooting right away. And of course, like, the action started picking up even more. But it just reminded me that the most important thing, way more important than any specs, is real world use. Is does the camera just kind of get out of your way and let you work as a professional? So look, for everybody, it's different. For me, the R5, it doesn't really work if I can't count on it 100%. And look, I know there's a lot of different ways you can shoot with the R5, and you can connect like a Atomos Ninja 5, and I actually did that. I ran a test, put it in 4K 60, it didn't overheat. I ran it for like basically till the battery ran out. It was over like an hour and a half, which is great, that's awesome. But for a hybrid job, you're not gonna wanna use a big Ninja 5 on top of your camera. That's kind of the whole point of using a camera that's not a cinema camera, is the fact that it's a little bit lighter, a little more nimble, and allows you to kind of hop back and forth between photos and videos. So fortunately with the R5, you can always hop back to that 4K 24 mode and capture video. But for what I was trying to shoot, the whole goal of the project, what I was assigned to do, what we talked about, was shooting in slow motion. So the fact that there's not like a 1080 slow motion that you can drop down to, the 60p doesn't work and the 120p doesn't work once you've overheated the camera. So to summarize, I would just say I'm definitely going to be sticking with my 1DX Mark III over the R5. I think they're both outstanding cameras. If I was more of a photographer, I might lean more towards the R5, but I'm a professional filmmaker. This is how I make 100% of my living, and I really just need to be able to show up to the job and know that my cameras are going to perform no matter what. I brought my 1DX Mark II like literally all over the world. I brought it to Iceland. It's been like rained and snowed on and sub-zero temperatures. I brought it to Death Valley when it's been over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I even had it one time in an underwater housing out in the Bahamas with Delaney, and I didn't even have my water housing sealed all the way. Water filled in my water housing and the camera got completely soaked, literally totally soaked, and it was totally fine. So ever since then, I've just kind of fallen in love with the durability and ruggedness of the 1DX Mark III, and just knowing that I can count on that camera, it's a really important thing for me. I will be keeping this camera for the production that I work with, and we're gonna be using it primarily as a stills camera, and we'll be using it for, like, you know, the occasional kind of lower pressure social media type shoots, but it definitely won't be getting any heavy duty use in our production for video. So anyways, guys, that's it for me today. Hopefully you enjoyed this comparison. Let me know down in the comments if you had a different experience with the R5. I'd love to hear about it. And maybe just for me on that one specific day, it wasn't working. But if you like this kind of video, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.